I'm James Boston, the founder of the AFBC. The AFBC intends to examine the legacies of British colonisation through educational content, social dialogue, and exploring ways in which we can seek to inform global policy around reparations and decolonisation. I'm joined today by Chris Famous, an elected member of Parliament for the constituency 11, Devonshire East in Bermuda. Chris was born into a politically active family that helped form the Progressive Labour Party, which you can see on the sign behind him. He currently serves on the Bermuda government's Comprehensive Immigration Reform Committee and the Stamp Advisory Committee. Our topic today is focused on the history and legacies of British colonisation in Bermuda. We'll be exploring topics such as independence and decolonisation in lots of detail. Chris, I'd like to welcome you to the AFBC platform.
Thank you. I really appreciate what you're doing worldwide, and I personally appreciate you reaching out to myself a few months ago.
And thank you very much for agreeing to this interview. So it'd be good if you tell our audience a bit more about yourself and your background.
Okay, my name is Chris. I was born to parents of the Caribbean, obviously of African heritage, you can see. My mother is from the British Virgin Islands. Her father was from Antigua. And my father's family is from St. Kitts and Nevis. So you can safely say my whole lineage was born into British colonies. Because when my grandparents were born, those countries were still colonies. Okay. So I've had a blessed life where I've got to grow up in many different Caribbean islands, Bermuda, the Virgin Islands, St. Thomas, which is U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Eustatius, which is the Dutch Caribbean, Jamaica, and one or two other islands. But suffice it to say, they are those that are independent, very few, Jamaica, and the rest are colonies. And there's a commonality. I mean, each island has its own dialect, just like if you went from Manchester to Liverpool, it's a different dialect, but it's basically the same culture, kind of. So my life goal is to try to do what I can to help to unite the people of the Caribbean through political means, social means, and otherwise, and get us to realize what we are all the same people, and the division between us does not help.
Thank you very much. So we're going to move into the kind of first section of our interview and get into some history. And I want to keep this really basic because there are a lot of people who may not know anything about the history of Bermuda with regards to British colonisation. So let's start with number one. Why did Britain colonize Bermuda?
Actually, in 1609, a fleet set out from Plymouth heading towards Virginia. Silly them, they had it out during the middle of hurricane season. And one ship, the actual flagship of this fleet, got caught up in a hurricane and got shipwrecked off the east coast of Bermuda. Everybody survived miraculously. And back then you didn't have WhatsApp or whatever to say, hey, come rescue me, right? And they had to start a settlement here. So the colonization of Bermuda was actually accidental because they were on their way to colonize Jamestown in Virginia. So that was 1609. Then once they were here, they realized, hey, it's an island, it's unoccupied. Hey, we might as well just keep this for ourselves. So it wasn't like other islands where they found natives there, as in like the Tiano or the Caribbeans. There were no inhabitants there. It was totally uninhabited. So they figured, hey, typical British smartness. Hey, that's an island just laying around by itself. Let's take it, lads. and then they started a settlement here, and subsequent to that, they realized they can grow tobacco, arrowroot, onions, and a few other things. So, and because Bermuda's geographic location is midway between Europe and the Americas, it became strategically important for them because the Royal Navy could bring their ships here, fix them up to and from the colonies.
Okay, so then how did that colonization go on to impact Bermuda and its population? So you mentioned that there were no indigenous populations, but there were African populations that were brought to Bermuda, right?
Okay, so in 1616, they brought the first enslaved African and enslaved Native American here as pearl divers. That didn't work out too well because we didn't have any pearls. And then they realized, like, well, hey, let's get some enslaved Africans from the other islands further south, bring them up here, and we can do, as I said, potatoes, onions, tobacco, not so much cotton because of our climate. But so subsequent to 1616 is when they started to bring in enslaved Africans to Bermuda. And most of those didn't come directly from Africa. They came via the West Indies.
Okay, and what was the
bigger plantations?
And what was the impact of that kind of process of slavery? What was the impact of that upon the African populations themselves, but also the British settler population?
Well, that's like the guy who won the lottery and the guy who didn't. The enslaved Africans that they brought here from the West Indies obviously were working for nothing. So you had generations, basically 2 centuries of free labor. Meanwhile, at the same time, the English settlers, many of them, not all, they came here and they ended up with lots and lots of land, free labor, and eventually they built up generational wealth, right? Imagine you get a run for 200 years of not paying taxes. It's pretty good, right? So what the net result was that by the time we had emancipation, the Africans, enslaved Africans who are now Bermudians, had nothing, and the settler class, they had everything. And it's to some extent, it's still too much. To some extent, it's still of that economic division is still there.
Okay. And in terms of the Native American populations that were also enslaved, how did that colonization and slavery affect those communities?
Okay, so in the eastern, so as you know, basically America was inhabited by indigenous people, and the British went there, killed them, took their land. And a lot of those persons were enslaved and brought to Bermuda because we were the closest island to the east, right? So to the eastern end of our set of islands, we have one island called St. David's, and that island was mostly populated by Native Americans. Then they mixed with Black African slaves and some English and Scottish and so on. So you have this sort of area, or you have a subset of our population that you could look right at them and you can see that they have Native American blood in them, or the features and so on.
Okay.
So you had this sort of like, you had the whites, then you had the blacks, then you had sort of the mulatto class, I guess you would say.
Okay. So in terms of 2022, how does that history of British colonization continue to affect modern Bermuda?
Well, in every way. To be frank, our legal system is the same as you'll find in England. Our political system is the Westminster system. Our school system is British system. We drive on the left. We speak English, right? Um, so every tenet of our logistical tenet of our existence is based on English culture. Um, the legacy of that separation is that the whites and others primarily are the ones who control the economy in Bermuda. The blacks, by and large, as educated as we may be, are still economically subservient to the whites. We don't own the commercial buildings. We don't own the big businesses. We have political power, but we don't have economic power, which at the end of the day is the dollar. The dollar is what runs everything, or the pound, as you would say in England. You know?
Okay, so you mentioned there that a lot of Bermudan culture is very much based on English culture. Were the descendants of the enslaved Africans, were they able to retain any of their African culture at all?
Very little. We have heard what we call the Gombe's, which is a sort of I have to send you a picture, but basically that descends from the majority of Black people in Bermuda. Their family originated in St. Kitts and Nevis. So that was an African heritage that was in St. Kitts and Nevis that we brought here to Bermuda. But as far as speaking African or knowing where in Africa we came from, one of the things that the English have been successful in doing is divide and conquer, right? So up until about 20 years ago, there was a mindset that you couldn't even admit. You were looked at as less than if your family came from the Caribbean, right? So the English set up in their hierarchy system. You got whites, then you got light skin, then you got brown skin, then you got people my complexion, right? So if you fell into my complexion, you were listed as the bottom of the social economic barrel. Even if you had money, you're still listed as bottom of the social economic barrel. So the bottom line was that many Bermudians, my complexion or even your complexion, used to deny that they had, first they denied that they had Caribbean heritage. Then if you said to them, well, you know, your family had to come from Africa. Oh, no, I'm not African, I'm Bermudian. So it's this full sense of mindset to say, oh, Bermudian is like some whole different race altogether, right? So the psychological damage was such that only in the last 20 years, people have been, I would say 20, I wouldn't say more than 20 years, but 20 years for the majority of people. Only these last few years that people have been proud to say, I'm Black or my family is from whichever other island, right? When it becomes socially acceptable in America to say, yes, I'm African American, or socially acceptable in Britain to say, oh, I'm Afro-Caribbean, oh, suddenly Bermudians are like, oh, okay, I guess I could identify as African now, you know?
Okay, interesting. So you've sort of touched on this already, but what are some of the current attitudes in Bermuda towards British colonization?
It's mixed because since 2002, 20 years now, Bermudians now have been allowed to live and work in the UK. So you have a good proportion, maybe 7% of our population have left Bermuda to live in the UK, which is approximately 3,000 to 4,000 persons, which isn't much in the UK sense of thing, but in the Bermuda context, that's about 7% of our total population. So now people are living over there and they see, okay, you know, they know about the underground, they know all the things about living in UK. there's less of a mystique about, oh, the streets being paved with gold and so on. But the general attitude is one of acceptance more than anything else. If you said to people, oh, you know, the British did this, the British did that, they shrug it off like, oh, well, that was the past, you know, nothing we could do about it now. I wouldn't say we're royalists, but you would have an amount of persons who have a very strong affinity with the Queen, right? Not so much with our son or our grandson, but with the Queen.
And do those attitudes vary from community to community in Bermuda?
Okay, so for the white community, many of them are second or third generation English, where back post World War II, you had a large influx of people come here from England to work in our civil service, whether it be police, firemen, post office, you name it. They were just given everything. And sort of like what you saw in Australia, where keep Australia white. So when the government saw the birth records, birth statistics, where whites were having 1 or 2 children and blacks were having 3 and 4, 10 children, they saw the trend that, hey, within 10 years, we're gonna be the minority. So what they did is created government jobs for persons, and they only advertised in the UK. They had to be from the UK or Commonwealth country in order to get these jobs. So they got here, they came here. Within 3 years, they were given the right to vote. Black people didn't get the right to vote until 1968 in this country. So what was the net result? That you now have persons who are second and third generation English, who, of course, they have a strong affinity with England because that's where my mom's from. That's where my nan is, you know? So they would have a thing where they love England. Bermudians, Black Bermudians, some of them love England. The rest, most of us haven't been to England. My first trip to England, I was 40 something years old. 45 or something like that.
And do you get a sense that people in Bermuda feel that it's important to be aware of that British colonization and how it may continue to affect things today?
I would say it's cyclical, right? Because when you have Black Lives Matter, a killing that had nothing to do with Bermuda, it's all this awareness of, oh, we need to know, our children need to know the history, blah, 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 which is true. But then it wanes off, right? So it's something that has to be done slowly but surely. You can't just dump it all on at one time because there's too much information overload. And so I would say the awareness is growing, but it's still a long way to go.
Okay, and you sort of touched on this earlier, but in schools in Bermuda, is the British Empire and British colonization in Bermuda, is that taught at all or not really?
A very sanitized version, right? Because the textbook that, when I was in high school, the textbooks that I was reading from was written by a gentleman who descends from those English settlers. So of course, he's not going to write that his people owned slaves, right? You have a white man with a surname, and you have all these Black people, my complexion, with the same surname. It's not a coincidence how they got that surname. So it was a very sanitized version, and up to today, we still are trying to, how can I say, deprogram the young children to incorporate the realities of what slavery was globally and what slavery is, what slavery did to Bermudians. But my generation and above were sort of inculcated that slavery was benign in Bermuda. It wasn't bad like it was in other islands. The slaves in Bermuda were treated nice. They were given clothes. They were given free food. You know, all the usual mumbo jumbo, right?
Interesting. Okay, so to move on to kind of the next section of the interview then, should Bermuda become an independent nation, in your opinion?
My personal opinion, when we answer, when ultimately we have to answer to people like Boris Johnson and Rishi whatever as our political leaders, there's no question in my mind that we need to be independent. The challenge for many Bermudians is that many white Bermudians will never entertain the concept of independence. Many Black Bermudians are of the same mindset. So the challenge is to, over the course of the next decade, show people why we need to be independent. There's this boogeyman that's constantly out there. Oh, if you go independent, you're going to end up like Jamaica and Haiti or some other country that people deem as less than, right? And Jamaica's got the average Black person, the average Jamaica has more business owners, Black business owners than Bermuda per capita. So we're actually behind Jamaica when you look at it from that point of view. You know, so it's this constant phobia that it's sort of like Brexit, right? Like when people, whether you're pro or con, people when they're saying with Brexit, they're like, oh, we gotta get rid of EU because every day we're sending 175 million pounds to Belgium. Factually untrue, right? But it scared people enough to say, hey, let me tick the box to leave Brexit. Oh, if we leave Brexit, we could take control of all it. Now what? Now you got supply chain shortages, right? So, you know, you have to be factual in your arguments. And when you are factual in your arguments, you're able to dissipate the myths that others are put forward.
Okay, and do you think that in the future, Bermuda will become an independent nation?
Yes, but it won't be based off of emotion. It'll be based off of pragmatism, in the sense that our economy is 85% what we call international business, offshore business, right? And the UK is threatening, constantly threatening our economy, because as you know, in London, or as they say, London is the center of money laundering, right? The center of this, that center of finance. And they see Bermuda, BVI, Cayman Islands, and one or two other islands as competition. So they are enacting laws between them and the EU that are slowly but surely eroding our, yes, you say, client base, right? And as long as we have to answer to UK, then we've got problems. But if we're able to not answer to the UK, then we can dictate our own financial situation to some extent. So that, to me, is going to be when the big business realize, hey, we've got to cut a trail. Then that's when we're going to go independent, not based off of the slavery and colonialism and all that type of thing.
Okay, thank you for that. And the last few questions then, what would decolonization in Bermuda look like today?
Okay, let's look at other islands, similar population. Decolonization, first of all, you have to have in your mind to be decolonized. So decolonization will look like, we have our own flag. Two, we have a greater identity of self. We're not dictated to by England. Every law that we pass in Parliament has to have a royal assent. So we have a governor appointed from the FCDO here, that there's no law whatsoever that unless the governor, whoever it is, signs off on it, we can't form our own laws. We can't even negotiate air routes. In other words, if we wanted to go to EasyJet and say, hey, would you fly to Bermuda at a cheaper rate than British Airways, and they say, sure, we have to go through the British government. And they're going to say, no, mate, you can't do that. Because why? The British government is part owner of British Airways. So they aren't allowing competition. So right now, if I want a ticket from the UK to Bermuda, one way is almost $1,000, right? So that's hurting our tourism. There's so many different facets, whether it be logistical or emotive, that decolonization is almost like you're a drug addict and you're saying, okay, what would being sober look like? And you can't even really, you've been a drug addict for so long, you can't even really say, I can't pinpoint everything, but I have one or two key items that might be like, you know.
And do you feel that decolonization is important for Bermuda? And do you feel that a lot of the population of Bermuda, specifically those who descend from enslaved Africans, do you think that they feel like decolonization is important for Bermuda?
The last poll showed maybe 25% of the population were interested in decolonization, and that's mostly the older generations. The younger generations, because they have this avenue now to live and work in the UK. If you said decolonization / independence to them, the first factor goes in their mind is that, oh, if we do this, we won't be allowed to go work and live in the UK. So we're sort of in this vortex where the people that want to be decolonized are sort of dying off, and the next generation of voters, they want to stay. So it's almost like they want, you can parallel it with Brexit, right? But not necessarily for the right reasons. The younger generation want to stay tied to the EU. The younger generation in Bermuda want to stay tied to the UK, right? The older generation who went through the civil rights struggles and all of that, they're willing to, like, say, cut the ties right now. But unfortunately, I don't see that happening. I don't see a conscientious mindset to say we've got to be decolonized, we've got to be decolonized.
Interesting. Chris, it's been really, really interesting speaking to you. I've learned so much, and I'm hopeful that our audience will learn so much from you as well. Where can people get in touch with you should they have any questions for you?
Through AFB. Well, the other how you first, I think how you first found out about us was we have a Facebook page, Territories Talk, and we also have a show every other week, which is essentially a show of the 6. There are 14 remaining territories / colonies of the British Empire, 6 of which are in the Caribbean region, which is Anguilla, Bermuda, British Virgin Islands, Turks and Caicos, Montserrat, and Cayman Islands. And the British, being in their infinite wisdom, have ruled by divide and conquer. So for good 400 years now, we've been indoctrinated that, oh, those people in that island, you're different from them, and you're different from these people. It's the same mindset, right? So a few of us in the different remaining colonies decided, like, no, we're not playing into that anymore. So we have these shows every 2 weeks that have guests from different islands on, speaking on pertinent topics such as cost of living, women in leadership, decolonization, so other topics. But the general thrust of it is for the viewing public to see that we're all the same, right? The accents may differ, but we're encountering the same thing. We're encountering high levels of obesity. We're encountering the fact that our native people our young people can no longer purchase property in our own countries. The British are constantly interfering in our parliamentary process. So many different things that now that we're together and we're comparing notes, the British are getting a little like, oh my God, they finally figured out that we've been scamming them, you know? So if they want to find me, long story short, Territories Talk. You can find it on Facebook or you can find it on YouTube.
Thank you very much. And if you want to get in touch with myself, you can do so through the AFBC networks, LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and we also have a Facebook page as well. We also have WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, LinkedIn groups where you can ask questions, share content, and learn from content such as the interview that we've done today. I hope that you all enjoyed this interview. If you have any questions, please put them in the comment section below. I'm James Boston, I'm your interview host, and thank you for joining us today.